People in the chat mentioned Piers Morgan. Andrew Tate sat down with Piers Morgan to discuss Israel-Palestine. And boy, did he have some words for Ben Shapiro. Let's take a look.
So Ben is a warmonger. Ben has been wrong on basically every single issue you can name. He was with you with the vaccine and every other war. Ben is always calling for other people's young men to go and die in some war. He seems to love it. I don't know if he has short man syndrome, but he's always behind his desk calling about how important it is that big, strong men like me go and die.
I resent that as a short man.
And the reason he tweeted that and said that is because when Hamas and Israel, at the very early in the conflict, I think it was 3 days in, were discussing possible peace talks, he tweeted, no, absolutely not, fuck them, kill them all. And I said, Ben, as a man who's done his own fighting, because I've had a life of pain and violence, listen to me. Peace is always worth a conversation. What I said is that we should always be prepared to at least discuss peace. He, because he's a warmonger, said, no, peace is not worth a conversation. You're this, you're that, da-da. Because he's always sitting behind his desk. He must have a booster chair, and he's always running his mouth trying to invoke violence and call for war. And I find it kind of hypocritical because a man who's so small he would die if he was slapped on the street, sitting behind a desk and screaming for other people to be annihilated, I think is kind of, it's worse than
I believe
it's insane.
I believe if he was sitting here listening to this, he would say that what he's screaming for is for Jewish people in Israel to defend themselves. And he's a Jewish man.
All Ben does is call for war. And I agree. Defending yourself.
That's not all he does.
That's all he does. And calling for war and defending yourself is very different than genocide. And then,
exactly.
Like
hey, who's this guy? Who's this guy? You know, we haven't had many kind words to say about Andrew Tate. I probably still don't about the man himself. But this is not self-defense. Even this fucking guy. Even this guy with a testosterone level of 3,851 is saying there's a difference between self-defense and genocide. That's obvious to even this guy. And Piers Morgan can't see that.
It's hard out here for a pimp.
Yeah.
No, look, Andrew Tate, as well as many others who have been unpersoned or non-personed or portrayed as the worst threat to Western civilization, most of these guys are certainly no worse than the people who have prominent, respected positions in society. And very often they will say red pill stuff like this. And if you're keeping score, clearly that's the issue with them. It is not that they are this unconscionable danger to society. It is that they're a danger to the establishment. And that does not mean I'm a fan. I've heard some things he has said about women that is genuinely misogynistic. But I've also heard him say things about war, about society, about the establishment that are dead on. My argument with a lot of the culture war kind of stuff for as long as we've had the show has been, if you don't want to empower guys like this, you had better find an argument that is as compelling as this one. Or you had better argue this in cases like this, because otherwise you're leaving the field to Andrew Tate. You're leaving the field in some areas to a Ron DeSantis. You're leaving the field to people that you don't want in charge. But in the end, if you are just absolutely diametrically opposed to everything that the public believes in and thinks is right, well, they're going to turn to whoever sounds like they're more aligned with them, and that's going to mean people like Andrew Tate.
Overall, most of Ben's worldviews and mine probably align. We don't align on the religious sect, we don't rely on the religious points, fine. But our overall worldviews about how society should function probably align on many of the key issues. I don't have a beef with Ben, and I don't watch his show, and I have no idea what he talks about a lot of the time. But what I do know is that every time I turn it on, he's calling for someone else's son to go and die in a ditch somewhere for his interests. And I don't like people who are not advocates for peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, said Candace, who is far more intelligent than Ben will ever be. And she is completely right.
That was 5
he
Corinthians,
replied
blessed are the peacemakers.
Rhetoric, starting an argument with me when I said we should talk about peace. I say we should talk about peace. He calls for the death of civilians, and somehow we're asking why my point of view is seen as abstract. It's insane. Why can't we all just sit down and say the fighting must end? Why can't we do that? Why can't we sit and say, nobody should be dying, let's stop using the most advanced military weaponry on the planet to blow the limbs off children? Why can't we say that without being deemed some kind of terrorist sympathizer or anti-Semite? It's insanity. Trump came along and didn't start a single war. He's the only one who didn't. And they're going to come along him and make him a bad guy. When a new president comes in, it's just endless war and death and killing. Have you seen a dead body, Piers? Have you seen people lose a fucking limb? It's disgusting. I know what's happening over there.
Have you seen that?
I don't need to tell you about the parts of my history that I'm not prepared to share, Piers.
Yeah,
I said it to Ben. I said people who have done their own fighting and seen their own violence and have seen people bleed out in the street from a stab wound are not going to be so smart and so quick to sit behind a desk and call for the death of innocent people. It's disgusting what's happening. I don't want anyone to die on either side. And when I come along as a peacemaker and say this is insane, because he's a warmonger, because he has chosen blinkers and sees one side of the argument and refuses to accept the humanity of Palestinians, he says I'm a bad person for calling for peace.
Well, you know why?
You know why? All right, for $64,000, folks, what is Piers Morgan going to say now? What do you think he's going to say? Let's get our guesses in. Let's register our guesses in the chat. Here we go.
Because you'll probably listen to this interview and say, this guy can't even describe Hamas as terrorists.
Oh,
that was my guess. That was my guess.
Who could have seen that one coming? What a surprise. What a surprise. That's this guy's only answer. It's his only question. This guy never asks any other questions besides that. That's the only thing he has. Do you condemn Hamas? That's it. That's it. Now, you got this rift in the rights, and our super chatter, McDougal, will probably appreciate us for calling this out, because this is, I think, a real rift in the right. You saw Candace Owens sort of break from Shapiro on Israel, guys like Andrew Tate, right? Now, Tate takes it further than a lot of the more isolationist right-wingers by saying, I can acknowledge the humanity of the Palestinian people. A lot in the sort of quasi-anti-Israel, but sort of anti-interventionist right just say, let's just wash our hands of it. It's not our problem. That's the sort of Sagaringetti right wing. I don't understand why we should really care about this at all, right? But they don't go as far as to affirm the humanity of the Palestinian people. So you really have three sections of right-wingers. You have the Ben Shapiro, hardline, neocon, kill them all, which is not an unfair interpretation on Tate's part of what Shapiro's position is.
Right.
Then you have the Sagar sort of libertarian isolationist right, which is, yeah, we shouldn't be funding this because it's not in our interest, while really expressing no empathy or concern for the people in Gaza. It's just kind of not our problem. And then you have this point of view represented in this case by Tate, and kind of, as you can see in that Norm Finkelstein interview, by Candace Owens as well. So it's an interesting fracture on the right. And that's how you really know Israel is screwed from a PR standpoint, and why long-term they're going to have no real standing in the world, because even the right wing, which is historically very pro-Israel, is splitting into three different pieces on this, only one of which is really friendly to Israel's position.
Right. And Donald Trump is on the wrong side of that split, interestingly.
He is. Now, fortunately for him, there's really no one else in that primary who's on the right side of that split.
True. He doesn't have anyone with a reasonable position. I mean, is there anyone running with a reasonable position on Israel?
No.
Right?
It's just
there's nobody.
No.
Dr. Shiva that they keep wanting us to interview.
Yeah, well, he's running as an independent. Look, the only people
but he's not legally qualified either.
No, you have a guy who can't serve, and then you have Cornel West and Jill Stein, who are polling at a combined 2 points because they can't get their shit together to actually coalesce whatever coalition may or may not be there, which was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points until they proved how unserious they were. So, yeah, I mean, fortunately for Trump, he has no real competition, but there is a serious fracture on the right when it comes to this issue.
Please clap.